I'm Christian Bryant. We're all guilty of sending unknown calls straight to voicemail, but in one now viral case, a kind of life-saving call was ignored. We're unpacking that. Then student loans are adding up, but what are the odds you can get yours forgiven? There's no one-size-fits-all solution, but there are several proposals. We're taking a look at what some of those entail. But first, our top story. After 17 plus years of building itself as a social media company, Facebook is apparently thinking about changing gears. The company is ramping up investments and even considering a name change to match its new focus, a futuristic concept known as the Metaverse. And with that new focus on a new virtual frontier, the company that has up to now been known as Facebook is reportedly considering rebranding under a new name, with the news expected to drop at its big annual VR conference, Connect. It could be one of a handful of steps taken by CEO Mark Zuckerberg to take the company in an entirely new direction.
We're going to be able to step outside the limits of the physical world and experience things and be part of communities that weren't even possible before.
Now, the site we've all come to know and love and hate will still be called Facebook, but the social media giant is just one of the company's standalone services, stuff like WhatsApp, Instagram, and Oculus VR. They've come to define their parent company's direction almost as much as Facebook has, hence the disparate services being reorganized under one name. We saw a similar rebrand from fellow tech giant Alphabet, which used to be known as Google before it added companies like YouTube and Waze to its portfolio. And in a similar move, its core site Google remained Google after the company was reorganized as Alphabet. Zuckerberg has made it clear in recent months that he thinks his company's future is in the Metaverse, a vision of the next evolution of the internet, typically centered around virtual reality. In an earnings call this week, Zuckerberg said he wants 1 billion people to be using the Metaverse by the end of the decade. The company has already been making moves on that front. Investments in its Reality Labs division, which controls the virtual reality side of the business, are expected to blow a $10 billion hole in the company's budget this year. Among those investments is a $10 million fund for creators to participate in Horizon Worlds, Zuckerberg's latest stab at a virtual reality space for Oculus users. Doubling down on the Metaverse could put Facebook at the forefront of the next phase of the internet, assuming the Metaverse ever takes off. We should note, though, that all this pivoting comes at a pretty convenient time for the company. There's a lot of baggage attached to the word Facebook right now. The company is facing a torrent of bad publicity thanks to a trove of leaked internal documents. The leaks appear to show Facebook struggling with containing misinformation and abusive content on its platforms, which is likely to lead to more calls for regulation of the social media giant. A new name won't make these pressures go away overnight, but it could help give the impression that the company is turning over a new leaf and provide a convenient distraction from the ongoing scandals. The turmoil hasn't eaten into its bottom line much. The company continues to do well financially during the pandemic. Its most recent earnings report showed year-over-year income growing by 17%. So here's a question though. What is the Metaverse? And why is Mark Zuckerberg so interested in hitching his wagon to a relatively little-known online space? Let's bring in our resident expert on not just gaming and social platforms, but also this merging of our physical and virtual spaces. Newsy reporter Matt Picked. Matt, can you educate us here a bit on what the Metaverse is exactly? Like, does this exist anywhere else?
Hey, Christian. So I think a lot of people, even the experts, are still trying to figure out exactly what the metaverse is. It's kind of a vision of what the internet of the future is supposed to look like, and predicting the future, especially in tech, is always a pretty tough gig. But on a basic level, the metaverse is supposed to take a lot of the things we do online right now, go to work, shop, chat with our friends, that kind of thing, and put them into a gigantic immersive virtual space, probably using VR or augmented reality, that kind of thing. This is kind of an old concept. The word metaverse comes from a 1992 sci-fi novel called Snow Crash. And so there's been a few previous attempts over the years, most famously a service called Second Life, to build this kind of contiguous virtual space that the metaverse is supposed to inhabit. But right now, there are actually a lot of companies trying to jump on the metaverse train. Epic Games, the maker of the multiplayer game Fortnite, has famously used that game to try and hold big metaverse events, concerts and events and things. But Facebook isn't interested in building a metaverse. They want to build the metaverse. They want to be the default player in this space, the same way they were with the social media space a few years back. And whoever runs the metaverse is going to have a lot of leeway to set the rules about how e-commerce works on that platform. It can do things like, sell digital real estate, charge for skins, sell ads, that kind of thing. It's all in all expected to be a really lucrative position to occupy. Now, all of this metaverse stuff is years, if not decades in the future. And what it actually ends up looking like is still very, very much up in the air. But by striving to build the metaverse, Facebook is giving itself something aspirational to work towards and giving itself a distraction from some of the internal struggles around its current products. Back to you, Christian.
Thanks for that, Matt. I'm not sure I'm personally ready to live in an online universe created by Facebook, but I'll hold my judgment until we see what Zuckerberg has in store. Up next, we're going to stay plugged in on what's dominating the news feed, including one issue just about every American can get on the same side of. We're getting way too many spam calls, y'all.
Newsy Tonight is changing the conversation.
Incredible footage coming in live right now.
Away from opinions and arguments.
Tell our viewers how people there are preparing for the next extreme weather event.
Primetime news focused on facts. Understanding.
This is an investigation you will only see here tonight.
Reporting what matters and why it matters to you.
We're not really as divided as it may seem. Let's break down our latest Newsy poll.
Newsy Tonight, weeknights at 8, 7 Central, only on Newsy.
Welcome back, gang. While the news cycle continues, we're going to take shelter from those gale force winds and get caught up with some overlooked stories making waves on social media. Let's get into it.
Hi, this is Amy Fisher from Student Loan Support. Our records indicate you are eligible.
You know what I don't have right now? Student loans. No shade to Amy, but spamming seems like it's at an all-time high, and that might have prompted a lost hiker to reject repeated calls from their rescuers. The hiker went missing on Colorado's Mount Elbert, and according to Lake County Search and Rescue, multiple attempts to contact the subject via their cell phone were unsuccessful. The person eventually made it back to their spot 24 hours later. That ordeal had folks online sharing what seemed like sage wisdom about what to do when you get lost. Just change your voicemail to let people know you need help. Only thing is, that suggestion is codswallop. The Alpine Rescue Team in Colorado, a group of actual rescue professionals, says you shouldn't bother with your voicemail when you're lost and low on signal. Instead, they offered a few other pieces of advice. If your battery is low, call 911. If you have no signal, text for 911 to help. The message might still be able to get out, and most importantly, if you're not in imminent danger, just stay put. If I might add one more, you could also do what I just do and don't go hiking. Facebook has gotten a lot of bad press this week over the so-called Facebook papers, a trove of documents leaked by whistleblower Frances Haugen. One thing getting a lot of attention is how Facebook engineers prioritize emoji reactions to posts like the angry reaction over simple likes. That's a big deal because internal data showed that this pushed more emotional, provocative, and often misleading content into your news feed. Angry reactions in particular were disproportionately likely to be used for posts with misinformation, toxicity, and low-quality news. Oddly, no word on how pokes might have also fueled anger on the platform. When Facebook employees noticed this problem, a number of staffers expressed concern and they advocated for changes to the algorithm, but those proposals were sometimes overruled. One spokesperson for Facebook told the Washington Post, "We continue to work to understand what content creates negative experiences so we can reduce its distribution. This includes content that has a disproportionate amount of angry reactions, for example." And lastly, the internet has been buzzing about a teaser trailer that dropped for the new Buzz Lightyear movie. I feel like I owe you all an apology for that one. I am filled with regret. Lightyear follows Buzz Lightyear on a new adventure, only this isn't actually about the toy we know and love from the Toy Story franchise.
These are plastic. He can't fly.
They are a beryllium carbonic alloy, and I can fly.
The movie is following Buzz as a real person, voiced by Chris Evans, who exists in the world of the Toy Story movies that inspired the creation of the toy. But there's some debate online on what exactly that means. Does this mean there are aliens and space fights in the Toy Story universe? Or is this like a movie in the Toy Story universe that the toys are based on? Yeah, it's all a bit meta, but that's not gonna stop me from watching Hot Buzz when the movie hits theaters in June of 2022. We are a solid year and a half into the pandemic now, and a good chunk of the workforce is still working remotely. Even those that have returned to the office or never left their workplace might have seen meetings and other functions move entirely online. And that shift to more virtual and online work also opens up some new opportunities for employers who want to track their employees' work and productivity. Needless to say, the line between tracking productivity and things getting a little invasive can get blurry. Our partners at the Washington Post show what sort of new tools companies are using and what employees on the other end of that monitoring should know.
During the pandemic, many of us ended up working from home. To measure your work productivity, though, your company may have started using various technologies or surveillance tools to track you. Hi, I'm Washington Post reporter Daniela Burrell, and this is Help Desk, where we help make sense of the tech in your life. Tracking our work, timesheet, and gauging our productivity, they're all a normal part of doing business, right? Today, there are a lot of software and technologies to help companies track your productivity remotely. Take the software tool Hubstaff. Most of us probably don't even know that tools like this could be lurking behind our computer screen. They offer monitoring capabilities as a feature, so things like logging keystrokes and mouse movement, taking screenshots, and recording audio. Companies behind the tools say the goal is to improve productivity, help track a distributed workforce, and protect sensitive data. But some employees say the tools invade their privacy and can get pretty creepy, especially if they're working from home. In some cases, we don't even know when we're being watched or if someone is listening to our personal conversations. To give you a better sense of what surveillance tools can do, let's take a tour of software from Terramind. So if I were an employer using Terramind to monitor my employees, I would see a dashboard that looks something like this. Here I can see who's online, their time worked, and what they're working on. If I want to check in on a specific employee, I can click on one of them. Here, I can get a breakdown on exactly how they're spending their time and look at screenshots and videos from their monitors. I can also explore any of these tabs above to check out what emails they've been reading or sending, or see snapshots from their screen at various points throughout the day. Experts told me software services like this one work best when employees have full transparency about how they're being monitored and know their goals. If employers want to use this type of software, experts advise them to not only let their employees know they're being monitored, but how and when, and also specify exactly what they need to do to meet their goals. But the software can cause problems for companies if they misuse it. Employers should have a business purpose for monitoring employees and should avoid setting blanket goals that don't make sense for everyone. Meanwhile, employees who have company-issued devices should expect zero privacy. Zero. But if you bring your own device, you should make sure to read your company's policy. At the end of the day, employee monitoring tools can aid a company in its productivity goals. But if not used properly, it can hurt morale, break employee trust, and actually work against a company's goal for using them in the first place.
Many thanks to the folks at the Washington Post for that story. Oil spills happen way more often than you might think. When you're back, we'll tell you about how some of those non-headline grabbing spills can devastate local fishing industries.
It's time to see the bigger picture, widen the lens, narrow the divide.
We must love and support one another!
That support is shifting, and it's shifting toward concern for climate.
It's about the whole community stepping up to help.
Not everything is left or right, good or bad.
The human capacity for change is so inspiring.
It's time to look closer at the whole story.
A hurricane don't care what your color is or how much money you make. It affects us all.
It's time to ask, why?
The whole goal is to point people to something bigger.
Introducing a new point of view. Yours. Newsy. Watch free 24/7.
Every few years, an oil spill makes national news, like the Exxon Valdez in 1989 or Deepwater Horizon in 2010. But thousands of oil spills happen every year, ones that don't often get as much attention. And the consequences of those spills can be very real. National correspondent Amanda Brandeis went to one Southern California fish market that has been hit hard and explains how it's leading a new push to restrict oil drilling and pipelines.
At this floating fish market,
Pearson's Port, how can we help you?
October is synonymous with one thing.
Lobster opener before you make it or break it over the whole year.
We've been here 50 years. My husband has only ever been a fisherman, and he's a great one. As his wife, I am so proud to be able to sell what he catches.
But in this pocket of Southern California, tanks remain empty while fishermen sit idle.
Couldn't have happened at a worse time.
The season stained after a pipeline leaked thousands of gallons of crude oil into the ocean, roughly 40 miles southeast of Los Angeles.
We could just smell the oil all around our house.
While lower than initially estimated, the 25,000-gallon spill is costing nearby businesses.
How many people are you feeding?
Weeks later, fishing remains off limits as officials test whether marine life is safe to eat.
Lobster, we're hoping by Christmas. It just depends on when they let us fish.
Oh, okay.
We are down 80%. We are just constantly apologizing to people for not having our local seafood that we've been furnishing to them for our 50 years in business.
The market now relying on imported fish to feed customers.
You're welcome. Thank you. There's another one that's not coming.
This is the first lobster season we haven't had lobsters in 40 years.
After 18 long months of facing the challenge from the pandemic, an oil spill was the last thing our vibrant economic region needed to face.
Business coalitions along the Pacific, Atlantic, and Florida Gulf Coast are doubling down on calls to permanently ban new offshore drilling. The move being considered by lawmakers in the trillion-dollar spending bill.
Individual retailers, the mom-and-pop businesses, they suffer the most. The impact is immediate.
All righty. You like the skin on, Kathy?
More than relief funds, businesses say they want to get back to work.
Thank you. We appreciate you coming down. There's another one.
The Pearsons now putting their fate in trust built over decades.
We'll live through this too. We will live through this too.
In Newport Beach, California,
it's just timing.
I'm Amanda Brandeis reporting.
If you've watched us regularly, you know that the global economy is dealing with supply chain issues that have caused shortages in everything from electronics to groceries. One market that has been completely upended is the one for used cars. With semiconductor shortages leading to a lack of new cars on the market, consumers are turning to used ones instead, and the surge in prices just keeps going. If you bought a car earlier in the pandemic, it might have even appreciated in value since you bought it. National correspondent Alexa Liaco has more.
The streamers, signs, and promises of a good deal can only mean you're in one place. But this used car lot is missing one thing.
It's crazy. It's so hard to get vehicles, and people are waiting to buy them anyway, so a lot of times we never put them on the lot.
Richard Hughes started in the car business before he could drive.
I always, in the summertime, pump gas for my dad.
Decades later, he started his own used car dealership.
He's probably got a little more gray hair than he did back in his days. This year will be 35 years.
But his family business is changing.
We always like to look at somebody when we sold them a car or shake their hand or something like that. That's the thing of the past.
The pandemic has done to car buying what it's done to almost everything.
Go through the auctions myself and look at them myself online.
And supply chain problems caused a global chip shortage. There are no new cars coming out, so used cars are in high demand.
There's just not the inventory for anybody if you could have the merchandise to sell. It sells itself.
Richard sits online every day to buy cars at auctions.
It's easy to bid on 20 cars and only get 2 or 3 of them because everybody wants the same thing, and there's just not very many out there.
And he's paying a lot more for the few cars he can buy. Used car prices are up almost 30% over this time last year.
So many people's lifestyles changed. They decided to stop taking
public transportation or using Uber.
Car market analyst Carl Brower says with fewer cars out there and more people needing them, wait to buy a car if you can.
Both sides of that curve are moving in the wrong direction to keep prices down. There's really no indication that it's going to shift dramatically back to normal pricing anytime soon.
The record prices in the used car market are attracting attention. For the first time, Wall Street traders and other economists are looking to the used car market for how the economy will be in the months to come.
Used car prices are an element that people do consider for inflation. And so if that's what you're looking at, it's indicating pretty substantial inflation.
The used car market has also reflected pricing changes sooner than some other ways we measure the economy, including the Consumer Price Index that measures prices of goods and food.
Car sales and prices are all very commonly tied to the larger economic activity. If we can get the chips back and get the volumes up to where the demand is for these vehicles, it'll be a component that will boost the overall global economy.
But waiting for that boost has Richard considering a tough choice.
You have to change with the times, and I'm having a hard time with that part of it.
But he says he's going to hold on for as long as he can.
It's just in my blood.
Hoping one day there will be more than empty spaces outside his office. I'm Alexa Liaco reporting.
Many thanks to Alexa for that reporting. After a quick break, we'll be talking more about student loan debt and what loan forgiveness could look like for borrowers.
What do you think the future looks like?
From Newsy, renowned journalists and filmmakers, comes a celebration of storytelling.
Are we in a killer robots arms race right now?
When the suspect admits to it, I'm not going to argue the law with you.
New features every week. Newsy Docs presents Sunday nights at 9/8 Central, only on Newsy.
Some say college is the best 4 years of your life. From what I recall, yeah, it was a pretty good time. I was having such a good time that my dad wanted to pull me out of college, so I'll let you sort out what my academic performance looked like back then. But while it may be fun, we all know by now that it's also expensive. It can be a big financial burden on graduates. The average 4-year college graduate leaves with about $37,000 in debt. In the US, each year about 30% of undergraduates borrow money from the government, and their debt makes up about 92% of student loan debt in the country. There are plenty of ideas for how to make college more affordable for future students, but there's only one way to ease the burden of folks who've already taken on student debt. That's student loan forgiveness. Several recent studies have shown support from at least half of all Americans for some level of student debt forgiveness. But the details of that plan really matter, both for the graduates and for the politics of it all. So what would student loan forgiveness actually look like? When we're talking about student loan forgiveness, keep in mind we're talking about federal loans. The US Department of Education recently announced that the pause on federal student loan payments has been extended through January. Lucky for many of those with student debt. Senators Chuck Schumer and Elizabeth Warren support canceling up to $50,000 of debt for borrowers with an annual income of less than $125,000. So far this year, the Biden administration automatically forgave $5.8 billion worth of loans for people who are severely disabled and over $1 billion for students who went to institutions that no longer exist. The Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program has also recently been redesigned to forgive student loans for public service workers. But people are still calling for President Biden himself to cancel student loans on an even wider scale. But can he do that? Early in his term, Biden asked the Department of Justice and the Department of Education to review his legal authority. That review has not yet been completed. But Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi and student loan expert Mark Kantrowitz say Biden can't forgive student loans with the stroke of a pen.
The people who argue that he has that legal authority are misreading and taking out of context a section of the Higher Education Act, and they kind of have to look at it sideways to make their case. Only Congress has the power of the purse. I mean, only Congress can appropriate funds.
And even if lawmakers do agree on loan forgiveness, There's a whole other set of questions around who's eligible. Kantrowitz and other experts say graduates that are high income and capable of paying their student loans aren't likely to see their debt forgiven under the most likely policy plans. So who would see a difference in their debt? Data from the American Association of University Women show that women hold 2/3 of the country's student loan debt, as their earnings on average are less than their male counterparts, and Black women borrow the most. Many senior citizens are also still being burdened by student debt. Then there's a question of private student loans. As of now, President Biden has only mentioned the possibility of forgiveness for federal borrowers.
The HEROES Act of 2020, which passed the House but not the Senate, included a provision for forgiving $10,000 of private student loans in addition to federal student loans. So it could be either. I think it's more likely because of the cost limitations that it's going to be targeted at federal loans. Also, it is easier for the federal government to automatically implement the loan forgiveness for the ones that are held by the U.S. Department of Education.
College students have had it rough since the pandemic started. Rising seniors will have completed nearly half of their college career remotely, and now they're entering a job market that looks different than what they expected. So how are they preparing to land a job after graduation? National reporter Vanessa Mashanya spoke to career experts to get some advice.
You can land job offers without applying online, without even being on the job market. Here's how you do it.
To reach the next generation of job seekers, Madeline Mann meets them where they are.
Next time you apply for a job online, try this.
And where they are is TikTok and YouTube, where she runs her career advice channels as the self-made millennial.
Career strategist and human resources professional.
But just as a way to reach job seekers is changing, so is the job search.
To say that the job landscape has changed is a complete understatement.
Rising college seniors are no strangers to change. The pandemic had forced schools to go remote, and many traditional internship opportunities were not available. Though the latter half of their college experience was plagued with obstacles, the silver lining is that so many companies are hiring.
Well, the demand is definitely high. There's lots of jobs for a variety of reasons. Companies reduced headcount last year. They're growing again.
Brandy Britton is a district president for Robert Half, a human resources consulting firm. She says the demand for employees is making employers work harder to attract applicants by doing things like shortening their hiring process and offering higher wages. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average wage for non-managers is $25.83. That's up almost 8% from the start of the pandemic. However, the fastest growing wages can be found in industries like hospitality and retail, where wages are up around 10%. So are jobs for blue-collar workers. With all these openings and many in the corporate world being remote, it could be hard for someone new to the working world to get a sense of the culture or fit of a job. Britton suggests looking into contract work, where you can gain experience but don't necessarily have to commit long term.
And they're saying, okay, I like this industry. I think I want to go with this industry versus that industry. And normally you wouldn't have that opportunity.
So what things can college seniors be doing right now to set themselves up for success? Using the skills they gained in remote school and being plugged into this tech-focused world can add weight to their resume.
It could be that you've built your own website or have built a social media following and you're using certain tactics, marketing tactics, and you can use that as work samples. All of these things are really powerful.
No matter what the industry may be, the future for the class of 2022 looks brighter than the tough years they endured to get there. I'm Vanessa Mashanya reporting.
So the student debt crisis is a true generational crisis, meaning it's impacting younger generations more than it did their parents or their grandparents. That's partly because college costs more, obviously, but it's also because some other things like minimum wage haven't increased the same way. Newsy's Zach Toombs has the breakdown.
45 million Americans have student loan debt, about $37,000 worth on average. Now, there are a lot of ideas about how to change that, but to understand the possible fixes, you've got to understand the problems and how they play out in the game of life. See, a few decades ago, college costs were low enough that Boomer here could work just over 1,000 hours at a minimum wage job and pay for all 4 years of tuition at a public college. So Boomer graduates and carries on down the American dream road. Maybe he gets married, buys a house, and continues to accumulate wealth. But over the last few decades, the costs of college and a lot of other costs have gone way up, while the spending power of minimum wage jobs hasn't all that much. So Boomer Jr. would have to work more than 4 times as many hours at a minimum wage job as his parents did to pay for 4 years of tuition. That's a lot of work to fit into summers and weekends throughout school. So a lot of people aren't paying for college up front. As costs have grown beyond what students can handle, a lot of people are taking out loans to pay for it. And as Boomer Jr. goes through post-college life, they'll end up putting more money toward repaying those loans and have a lot less money left over for other things, which means some things get put off or don't happen at all, like buying a house or getting married, which means it takes a lot longer for Boomer Jr. to get into the game of life. In fact, it's like Boomer and Boomer Jr. were playing entirely different games. And there are so many people caught in this student debt trap that this is now the #1 type of debt in the country, topping $1.5 trillion in all. So what can be done about that? Well, there are a lot of ideas out there. The Trump White House rolled out a plan to cap the amount of federal student loans graduate students and parents can take out, which they hope will keep the cost of college down. We partnered with the polling firm Ipsos to ask people what they thought about this plan, and the results surprised us. A survey found most people overall do support student debt forgiveness, which has always been talked about as kind of a radical step. Even among people who had already paid off their student debt, we found most people approved of this. We asked about a few other plans as well, including lowering interest rates, which got the most support by far, and the idea of federal funding to cover 4 years of tuition for students, which got a small majority in support. Until somebody figures this issue out, a lot of people will be holding a lot of student loan debt, and that debt is changing the lives of tens of millions of Americans.
Up next, we're switching from student loan debt to medical debt. A lot of money is owed here. Welcome back to In the Loop. We're getting to the time of the year when many companies have opened or are opening their enrollment periods for benefits. Medicare's enrollment period is already open and the Federal Insurance Exchange is opening next week. But even with insurance, the threat of needing to go to a hospital and being saddled with medical debts still looms large for millions of Americans. Together, Americans have $140 billion in medical debt. That's more than all other debts combined. National correspondent Matt Pearl has more on the issue of medical debt and how one nonprofit is trying to fight it as a part of Newsy's To America series.
Shana Tova, my friends, a happy new year to us all.
It is the Jewish New Year.
The year 5782 has begun.
When Jews around the world repent.
Rosh Hashanah is my favorite holiday.
On a pulpit in Atlanta, Rabbi Sam Kay says observing Rosh Hashanah means embracing the concept of second chances. In a 20-minute sermon, he relives his.
A rabbinical student woke up in the middle of the night and rushed to the ER with the worst pain he'd ever felt in his life. Even with his insurance, he couldn't afford the bill. Do I have to tell you that that last example is my own?
Rabbi Kay had barely heard of medical debt until he lived it. Months of biopsies and tests left him with $20,000 in medical bills he couldn't pay.
I was absolutely terrified to even check my bank website. I didn't want to see the number. I didn't want to see how far I was away from zero. Even now, for myself, I get a letter from the doctor, I get a letter from the hospital, and I do not want to open it.
This summer, the Journal of the American Medical Association released a stunning report It found the total medical debt in America is roughly $140 billion. That's more than all other debt combined. The report also found 1 in 6 Americans has some amount of medical debt in collections.
The numbers are sort of mind-boggling.
Ruth Lande oversees debt operations at RIP Medical Debt, a nonprofit whose very existence shows how broken the system has become.
It's hard to collect on debt from patients because often people can't afford it. And so sometimes the hospitals sell it off to secondary debt collectors.
When they do, the debt loses value and loses more as it continues to go unpaid. RIP Medical Debt purchases and pays off people's debts for pennies on the dollar.
For that person, you're being billed for $1,000, and this is, an incredible burden to you. But on the market, that $1,000 is probably only worth $10 or $5 because the market knows that it's probably not going to be collected on. That's why we can buy it for cheap. At the end of it, if you say, that's crazy, you have understood it. It is crazy, this whole system.
Rabbi Kay was stuck in the system until he started his new job at the temple in Atlanta.
I said, is there any way that we can give me a forward, an advance on my current salary? And I went, I paid off all my credit cards, I paid off all my medical debt, and the next day I couldn't believe it. It was like walking on air.
Because of this temple, I got another chance.
When the rabbi learned of RIP Medical Debt, he used his pulpit to announce a fundraiser. His temple community raised more than $50,000 to relieve roughly $5 million in medical debt. There's no way to apply to get debt canceled for cheap. The people helped by RIP Medical Debt only find out when they get a giant envelope in the mail. But within a broken system,
God is giving us a nudge.
Those with pulpits, literal or financial, can fulfill the promise of a second chance.
So please help us bring the words of our Torah to life, and together let us answer God's call.
In Atlanta, I'm Matt Pearl.
Thanks to Matt for that piece. Debt can be so crippling for so many people in life and even in death. Funeral costs can average $10,000. Death isn't something many people like thinking about, but experts say it can make a big difference to start planning for the costs of dying while you're still alive. Newsy's Amber Strong has more.
$330 million. That's how much GoFundMe says has gone toward memorial fundraisers every year, covering things like family support after a death and funeral costs, an average $10,000 expense. Those high costs for death care can come as a surprise for the unprepared.
You don't want to think about your end, and you don't want to think about what life will be like without you.
Death and what you want after you die is the conversation nobody wants to have, unless of course you're librarian Andrea Castillo, and have led discussions at the local death cafe.
I had started as a person kind of trying to confront my own anxieties about death.
Death cafes all over the world tend to happen in people's homes or places like this library, where folks are comfortable gathering over coffee, cake, and conversations on death.
The topics can run the gamut from, we've talked about what it's like, losing a parent or losing a sibling. What arrangements do you want to make? Living wills. There are even like what it's like to clean out your relative's house after they die.
Talking about birth control doesn't make you pregnant, and talking about death doesn't make you die.
Sandy Schlondecker and Isabel Burney are volunteers with the Blue Ridge, Virginia branch of the National Funeral Consumers Alliance. They say the kinds of talks happening at death cafes are a good first step in planning for one of life's biggest expenses.
For the basic funeral, at one place it might be $5,000. Across the street it might be $10,000.
With prices varying so drastically, it may seem hard to know what's fair and what isn't if you're suddenly faced with burying a loved one or just hoping to plan ahead. The FCA says that's where they come in, compiling a list every 2 years comparing local funeral home costs. For example, the lowest price containers for remains will run you anywhere from $35 for a cremation container to $3,295 for a traditional casket. A hearse anywhere from $90 to $500, and embalming is anywhere from $425 to $1,395.
Once the person has died, they're traumatized. They're, everything's happening so fast. And comparison shopping just is not like a mindset.
The Federal Trade Commission also lays out some guidelines to protect consumers during what can be a really tough time. It's known as the funeral rule. For instance, funeral homes must provide an itemized list of the total cost of a funeral, or at least a good faith estimate up front. They also can't force you to buy one of their caskets, and must accept caskets from third-party vendors, which may be cheaper than what you're offered on site. Schlaudecker and Bernie say their group's mission is to make sure people know this kind of info exists, and to encourage families to prepare, but never prepay.
It's a good idea to think about what you want and to know about how much it will cost. Then you set aside that money and you control that money. Don't give it to a funeral home, because no one prepays for a TV and picks it up 3 years later.
But sometimes finding the cash is just difficult, which leads some to crowdsourcing. Even still, experts say having the conversation now can ease the burden, even if it's just emotionally. Amber Strong, Newsy, Washington.
We love hearing from you about what we're doing here. Are there stories you want us to cover? Something you want to see on ITL? Share it with us and post it on social media using the hashtag NewsyInTheLoop. We're going to go ahead and close the loop when you're back. And now it's time to wrap up this episode by closing the loop on our top stories. We took a look at the social network some of us love and some of us love to hate. The company that has up to now been known as Facebook is reportedly considering rebranding under a new name, with the news expected to drop at its big annual VR conference, Connect. It could be one of a handful of steps taken by CEO Mark Zuckerberg to take the company in an entirely new direction.
We're going to be able to step outside the limits of the physical world and experience things and be part of communities that weren't even possible before.
Zuckerberg has made it clear in recent months that he thinks his company's future is in the Metaverse, a vision of the next evolution of the internet, typically centered around virtual reality. In an earnings call this week, Zuckerberg said he wants 1 billion people to be using the Metaverse by the end of the decade. The company has already been making moves on that front. Investments in its Reality Labs division, which controls the virtual reality side of the business, are expected to blow a $10 billion hole in the company's budget this year. Among those investments is a $10 million fund for creators to participate in Horizon Worlds, Zuckerberg's latest stab at a virtual reality space for Oculus users. Doubling down on the metaverse could put Facebook at the forefront of the next phase of the internet, assuming the metaverse ever takes off. We should note, though, that all this pivoting comes at a pretty convenient time for the company. There's a lot of baggage attached to the word Facebook right now. And we also hit on the latest with student loans. When we're talking about student loan forgiveness, keep in mind we're talking about federal loans. The U.S. Department of Education recently announced that the pause on federal student loan payments has been extended through January. Lucky for many of those with student debt. Senators Chuck Schumer and Elizabeth Warren support canceling up to $50,000 of debt for borrowers with an annual income of less than $125,000. So far this year, the Biden administration automatically forgave $5.8 billion worth of loans for people who are severely disabled and over $1 billion for students who went to institutions that no longer exist. The Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program has also recently been redesigned to forgive student loans for public service workers. But people are still calling for President Biden himself to cancel student loans on an even wider scale. But can he do that? Early in his term, Biden asked the Department of Justice and the Department of Education to review his legal authority. That review has not yet been completed. That's it for this episode of In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. Even though the show is wrapping up, why don't you keep it right here on Newsy and see what else we got cooking?